Sometimes it's not the loudest stories that keep us up at night. It's the quiet ones, the ones that never quite made the headlines, the ones that left behind more questions than answers. The Final Trace is a true crime podcast about the strange, the unresolved, and the stories that slip through the cracks. From disappearances to mysterious deaths, to cases that were technically solved but still don't sit right. We dig into the overlooked, the eerie, and the human side of every story. Because even when a case goes cold, there's always something left behind. A clue, a feeling, a final trace. Follow The Final Trace wherever you listen to podcasts, and come find what still lingers in the silence. I'm your host, Hopper Daly, and this is The Final Trace.
Darkcast Network. Come to the dark side of indie podcasts.
Hey everyone, welcome to True Crime California. I'm your host Cindy, and I'm glad you're here. Hey everybody, I'm back with part 2 of the murder of Kristin Smart. Thanks everybody for tuning in and supporting the podcast. I'm really excited to be back and really glad to be back on a roll with these episodes and hoping I can get one out every week. Sorry again for the super long hiatus, but I'm back and ready to rock. So let's just jump in. The world is on fire. Everything's falling apart. Everything is crazy. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there. Y'all know how I feel. Anyway, okay, part 2 of the murder of Kristin Smart. The first thing I want to do is call out that for whatever reason, I said that Kristin Smart was born in 1979. She absolutely was not. She was born in 1977. I knew she was. That's what I had in my notes, but my brain said 9. So I apologize. She was born February 20th, 1977, which is how she was 19 in 1996. The math was not mathing. Hopefully none of you noticed. We can all call me out together in part 2 here, because if I had noticed something like that, it probably would have ruined my whole listening pleasure for the whole episode. It would have ruined it because I'm that kind of petty. Anyway, all right. So let's do a quick recap of what we've talked about. So as I just noted, Kristin Smart was a 19-year-old freshman at Cal Poly College. It was the Labor Day weekend of 1996, spanning May 24th and 25th when she went missing. She went alone to an off-campus party after splitting off from her friend Margarita, who lived in the same dorm where Kristin lived. And while at this party, which she attended by herself, she became intoxicated to the point of passing out on the ground outside the party. She was then walked home by Paul Flores after splitting off from 2 other students who had offered to walk her home. And from there, she went missing. So the last person to see her was Paul Flores. Other notes is that she gave people the name Roxy at this party, which police used as an excuse to not give a shit about her disappearance. As I noted in the first half of this, Paul Flores had a long history of problematic behavior, which was excused by both parents, including his father, Ruben, who was also abusive and problematic. Like I said, he was the last person to see Kristin alive, and he said that he left her outside her dorm to walk the rest of the way. The problem with that is that she was hardly able to walk on her own, per the other 2 students who were walking with them to that point. She also never made it to her room because there were people in her room that night and nobody saw or heard her come in. It took 3 days for Kristin to be officially considered missing thanks to the shitty campus police, and it took the same amount of time for those police to interview Paul, which they didn't even do in any official capacity until a few days after that even. His dorm room was not searched until mid-June after he had already moved out and the room had been cleaned, and his cars were never searched, at least for the first 20 years. But that being said, once cadaver dogs were allowed on campus, 4 of them independently alerted to Paul's dorm room and Paul's dorm room only even though they had access to all the dorms on campus and pretty much anywhere they wanted to go on campus. The only place they alerted was his room, and specifically his bed. So that pretty much catches us up high level. If you want more details, you can definitely go back to part 1 of my version of this story and listen to what I had to say about it. But that's just a brief recap before we get into the second half. And I do want to say it's really hard to know how to present this information, so I'm going to do my best, but there's just so much. And it's not that I don't want to present all of the information, but there are podcasts out there dedicated to this case, specifically Your Own Backyard, which is far and away the best podcast about this case that will ever exist. And there's no point in me trying to compete with that podcast. And so I'd rather keep it shorter and kind of honor the format that I've chosen. So if you notice that I'm not covering something about the case that you know, please know that it's not lack of research. It's more just me choosing the things that I think are most important to touch on within the format of my podcast. So I hope that makes sense for everyone. I do also want to note that while a lot happens in this case, most of it is in the year immediately following Kristin's disappearance. So, I'm going to cover mostly what happens in that year and then jump ahead a lot, which is, again, really frustrating because there's about 25 years of basically nothing going on with this case. So anyway, after Paul's dorm is searched, the campus police finally pass the case to the city police, who begin working with the FBI. And I know it's kind of confusing talking about like campus police versus city police. I do believe that both were involved for a time, but there was an official handoff around sometime in either like June or July. And at that time, the San Luis Obispo city police agree to work with the FBI. So they're starting to actually take this case seriously, but meanwhile, while they're getting their shit together, Kristin's parents and a bunch of volunteers are launching huge searches on campus and in the surrounding areas, trying to get tips from people and succeeding. And most of these tips are about Paul Flores. They're also putting out flyers and just doing whatever they can to get her story out. Now, there are local businesses who help with this, and they actually pay to put billboards up with her picture on them. And at some point, I believe it's the Smart family, they actually pay to put a billboard up just outside of Susan's home because she happened to be near where there was one. So she would have to look at it every day. And I kind of fucking love that. So once the city police officially take over, they bring Paul Flores in for yet another interview. And yet again, he lies about how he got the black eye. Now, this is the point at which he lied about it by saying he hit it on his steering wheel. But prior to that, he'd been interviewed twice. The first time he said, I don't know how I got this black eye or these scratches or the rug burn on my knee. The second time he said, I got the black eye in a basketball game. They probably didn't ask about the rug burn or the scratches because it had been enough time that they had healed, but his black eye was still there. Now, the third time when the city police bring him in, he said, I was fixing or removing my car stereo and I hit my eye. So he's clearly just changing his story however he wants, and nobody's really calling that out, which is a little interesting to me. Now, the other thing he apparently said during this interview, which was in late June, was after police told him, we know that you know where Kristin is. And he says to them, if you're so smart, where's her body? And it's like, dude, who said anything about a body? Like, what are you even talking about? Like, that's an admission of guilt to me. Like, that's a major slip up. At another point, he accidentally says, quote, we went back to my dorm instead of I went back to my dorm. So he's making a lot of mistakes in this interview, and it seems super obvious what's going on. But don't get excited. I'll remind you, this case spanned over 25 years. So this unfortunately led to nothing, but it's very interesting that he essentially admitted to knowing she was dead in this moment and that he took her back to his dorm, and he still did not get arrested. So also at this interview, he asks to leave so he can go to his mom's house and clean up concrete in her yard. And it's interesting because it's like, why does his mom's yard have concrete in it? And the reason is because he and his dad put down a bunch of 6-foot by 3-foot concrete planters in Susan's backyard just a week or two after Kristin went missing. And that is a very suspicious thing to do at this time. And that is a very suspicious size to make those planters, considering that would fit Kristin's body. So it's like, if you aren't hiding something, then you're just the dumbest people alive to choose to do this concrete project right after you become a suspect in a girl's disappearance. I mean, come the fuck on. Now, interestingly, in July, police get a search warrant for Ruben's house, not Susan's. Now, this is in part due to them learning through an interview with Susan that on the night that Kristin went missing, Ruben received a phone call in the middle of the night and got up and left. Now, I assume Susan, who seemingly had no problem lying about her son, admitted this, assuming the police had their phone records or somehow already knew this. But shockingly, another police fuck up, they never pulled the phone records. So they had to take Susan's word on this, and later on, they couldn't prove this ever happened. Which is bad enough, like, that they have to take her word for it, and it's like, why were the records not pulled? It's just so bad. So anyway, when police go to Ruben's house, they do a visual inspection, and they find 3 articles about Kristin's disappearance, including one under Ruben's mattress, another one under Paul's mattress, and a third one, I believe, in their kitchen. So, like, this is just red flag after red flag after red flag. But despite all of this very suspicious shit, police choose not to dig up Ruben's yard, which they had the right to do per that search warrant, because it would have been too costly. Now, this is straight up shocking, and as we'll learn, this is one of the biggest mistakes they ever made during this case. So shortly after this search, Ruben and Susan get back together, and Susan decides to list her Branch Street home for rent. A young couple with a new baby move in, and at first everything's cool, but pretty quickly this couple, the Lassiters, start to notice some really weird shit going on. Now first, they're getting a ton of mail from Susan, or for Susan I mean, from people begging her to tell police what she knows. And to be clear, the Lassiters had no idea whose home they were moving into or what the case was. They were totally in the dark about all of this. Now, they start to realize what's going on because people are sending postcards. So they're not like opening her mail, but they're learning about the case. And that's pretty shocking to think that like people think that there's a body buried in the yard where you live. You know, it's a little weird. So obviously they know who Kristin is now, and things start to kind of come together with the weirdnesses. Now, one of the things that happened before they moved in is the family told them, you guys can move into this house, but we have a metal trash can. It's in the back corner. Please do not touch it. Please do not use it. Now, by itself, that's not actually that weird of a thing. Like, I own a house in Oregon and I have a shed that I have all my stuff in, and I've asked the renters not to touch it. They can't use it. It's locked up. It's only for me. Do I have clues about a murder in there? Potentially a body? No, I do not. But I'm just kind of saying, like, just asking them to stay away from a trash can is really not that out of the ordinary or anything that would set off a red flag for me, unless I knew all of this other stuff. That being said, the Lassiters decided, you know, we're going to listen. We're not going to mess with it. Why do we care? It's just in the back of the yard. And eventually, around late September 1996, Ruben came and he got the trash can, and they never see it again. However, a few days later, on October 1st, Mary Lassiter, the wife living at the house with the new baby, finds an earring on the ground right in the path where Ruben had dragged the trash can. Now, knowing the case at this point, Mary called police to report the earring and said that a large, scary, bald detective came to the house and basically threatened them if they didn't turn it over. Which, like, she's calling you to turn it in. You don't need to threaten her. So weird the way that these cops acted in literally every situation. It's never correct. It's never correct. Anyway, Mary turned the earring over, and believe it or not, she was never contacted again. And unfortunately, she didn't take a photo of the earring, but she remembers what it looked like to this day. And I'll just tell you now that the police never opted to tell Kristin's family about the earring. And when her family did find out about it and demanded to see it, the police kept putting them off. And finally, when they couldn't put them off anymore, they admitted to having not only lost the earring, but to have never had entered it into evidence. They admitted to never having done that. So they lost the earring. They didn't put it into evidence. No photos were taken of it. No mention of how it got turned in, where, when, or why. And when the family was like, what on earth happened? They said, well, we looked at the earring And there's no way it belonged to a young woman. It was definitely the earring of a young child, which is complete fucking bullshit. This earring, as described by Mary, had a turquoise dot in the middle of a sort of teardrop silver plate, which is absolutely something like I would wear that. A lot of adults would wear that. And especially in the 90s, that's very much like a teen's earring. That's something anybody would wear. And what's almost funny, if it wasn't so ridiculous, is that there are literally photos of Kristin wearing a necklace that matches the earring. And these photos, some of them are used on her missing persons flyers. So it's like, this is the biggest, like, just fuck up of all the fuck. I mean, it's not the biggest. There's so many. But it's just another, like, blatant misstep by the police where they, like, tried to get this wrong. It's like, oh, it's a kid's earring. What, a bunch of men in a police department decided that? Like, you guys didn't even bother? And the worst part of this is that Mary said when she turned it in, she noticed there was a brown fingerprint on the back. Brown, likely as in dried blood. So just a very important piece of evidence, missing and gone forever. Now, also, there's one more thing, even crazier than the earring, that took place while the Lasseters lived at the Branch Street home. And this involved Mary's mother, who would come over to stay the night to help care for the newborn whenever Mary's husband would be gone at work, either out of town or overnight, just kind of working long hours. And I mentioned her mom because I believe she was the first person to notice this. And what she noticed was that every morning at 4:20 a.m., a loud beeping noise would start. And it would go for a few minutes at a time and then finally stop. She and Mary described it as sounding like a watch alarm and said that after some days, they decided to go outside and track down the noise because it was coming from the yard. They got to where they were hearing it. They were out there at like 4:30 a.m. listening for this beeping, and they noticed that it was coming from the ground underneath one of the planter boxes. The two women tried to dig it up, but they couldn't get to it. And they were like, this is fucking weird. So they called police and told them, and you all can guess what happened next. Absolutely nothing. Now, if we want to go, oh, well, that could have been anything, blah, 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 blah. First of all, yes, Kristin was wearing a watch. And second, yes, her alarm would be set for 4:20 a.m. And the reason for this is that she had just recently got a job as a lifeguard. And because she was one of the newest employees, she was taking on whatever shifts she could, which typically included very early morning shifts that nobody else wanted to work. So she would have to set the alarm so that she could get to work at 5 a.m. or sometimes 6 a.m. So 4:20 makes a lot of sense. And in fact, if we're like, oh, how do we know this? She had mentioned this to her mother before she went missing, that she had to get up super early and had to go to work. And I think that could have been part of, it might have just been a normal conversation, or it might have been part of her saying she wanted to come home. But in any case, we know that she was getting up early, that her watch was her alarm, and that she was wearing it. And the police did nothing. Now from here, Paul decides to enlist in the Navy, and the Smart family becomes scared that he'll leave the country and never be seen again. So to stop him from being able to leave, they file a civil lawsuit over Kristin's disappearance, and as a result, many witnesses and the Flores family are all deposed. Now that's when the police sort of interview them to see if there's like a case or to get information, right? So this is when the Smart family actually learn about the earring, which had to be super frustrating because the earring was turned in early October 1996, and we're now at the end of January 1997 when they just happened to find out about it. So, I mean, this would have never even come up if they hadn't sued and if they hadn't been consistently involved with and pushing the case, dragging the detectives along with them. Now, in March 1997, Susan evicted the Lasseter family from her home, likely after finding out they were cooperating with police. And as a result, before the move, Mary Lasseter allows police to search the home, which is technically hers while she's renting it. So they didn't have to get a search warrant to do this because the occupant of the home was like, yeah, come search it. Like, fuck this lady. Nothing is found, but they do bring cadaver dogs for this search. And they alert to the area where the metal trash can had previously been. Again, you can imagine what the police do with this other circumstantial, important, I don't even know what you would call this. It doesn't matter because they don't do anything. Now we're going to fast forward to November 1997, and finally, because of this lawsuit, Paul Flores is deposed. Now, you can go to YouTube and watch this video if you want to get really, really frustrated and really understand just, even in just the way he speaks, this man is just the worst. So what he does is they ask him probably 50 questions, and every single question he answers exactly the same way. On the advice of my attorney, I plead the fifth. He says something longer than that, like the state of California, blah, 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 some bullshit. You'd think I'd have it memorized because I've watched it, but like I'm trying to forget. But anyway, if you want to watch this deposition of Paul, you can go on YouTube. Now from here, a lot of little things happen. So his parents are both deposed at this time, and a lot more information comes out. But it's stuff that I'm going to kind of leave out because, again, there's a bunch of rabbit holes. And for the purpose of this podcast, I just want to stay on the high level. So after this deposition, they don't really charge Paul. I don't think much comes of it. But Susan does move out again and moves back to the Branch Street house and also gets herself a boyfriend named Mike McConville. Now, I don't know what the relationship is between Mike and Susan and Ruben at this point, but I feel like they're the Three Musketeers. And it's really, really strange because Susan and Ruben are still seemingly very close. And then Mike is kind of cool with this and also close with them. And it's my opinion that they're all involved in this. And it's just very, very strange that a man who was not there when this happened would choose to get into a relationship with somebody who's a part of this crime and make himself a part of it. So very, very strange to me. Anyway, in addition to getting herself a new boyfriend and moving back to Branch Street, she also builds an entire garage on top of the area where the dogs alerted. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. But again, nothing's done. Now we're in the year 2000 and police get yet another search warrant and are able to search Susan's yard using ground penetrating radar. In the warrant, they straight up say that Paul killed Kristin. Not that they believe it, that it happened. And that they have reason to believe her body is in Susan's yard. Now, they do this ground penetrating radar and they don't find anything. And they choose not to dig up the planters where the beeping watch had been reported. I don't know why. I think what it was is, I want to explain. So the radar is supposed to find large anomalies in the dirt, which in this case means disturbances. Like if the ground had been dug up because a body was in there. So shy of finding that, they didn't see the use in digging up the yard. But like, what if it was just her clothing buried there and her body was somewhere else? Which, spoiler alert, that's probably the case. But I mean, knowing an earring was found, knowing the watch was beeping from underground, which, by the way, the battery eventually died and it stopped beeping. But, having all this information should have been enough for them to use that warrant to do the fucking work. But again, all of this is par for the course with these people. So, of course, they don't dig up anything. And that's kind of it. So now we're going to jump forward again to May 2002. Paul is sentenced to 8 months in jail for violating his probation for multiple DUIs by drinking in a bar. So he's not allowed to drink as part of his probation, but a lot of people who know him has said it was very well known that he was an alcoholic. And so he couldn't stop himself from drinking. And I think also, as we'll find out later, he had another reason he was going to bars all the time. But he got himself in a little trouble and ended up in jail for 8 months. This same month in May, and exactly on May 25th, Kristin Smart's family have her declared legally dead 6 years to the day that she went missing. Now we're going to scoot forward again another 3 years to 2005 when the Flores family, and specifically Susan, but both Susan and Ruben, sue the Smart family for harassment. And now they do this because there's a man who's not actually associated with the Smart family really, who's decided to come to town, and he's not a detective or anything. He's just like a citizen, but he wants to crack this case. So he sits outside of Susan's house, takes photos of her, takes photos of Mike, takes photos of Paul, takes photos of her house. He makes a website about it. His first one is called Son of Susan. The next one I think is called Dig Up the Backyard. And the Flores family blames the Smart family for his actions and basically the harassment, the trauma, and whatever. So this is silly and baseless. but it does open up her home for yet another search to prove this man's actions are unfounded, which would make the lawsuit legitimate. Now, police again go in with radar, but this time they're not permitted to search the area with the planter boxes, which is wild that they would even agree to that, because, like, what's the point? Now, they do note that the garage built after the fact did make it difficult to get a good reading of Susan's yard. And again, this is so frustrating, they opt to not search Ruben's yard as they don't want to clear the brush on the property because that would be hard work. So even though, once again, they have the opportunity to use ground penetrating radar in Ruben's yard to dig it up, they choose not to, and they find nothing. Now, I wasn't totally sure where to add this note, so I'll just put it here. In the beginning of this case, very early on, the Flores family had offered to have Paul show police where Kristin's body was, if in return he could plead to, I believe, manslaughter. Now, this never came to fruition, as I think they withdrew the offer before the Smart family could respond, but I just wanted to put that out there because of all this is like, I don't know how to better express that this is just a formality that this man got to be free for so many years before going to prison for something everybody knew he did. So I just wanted to call that out because that is a fact of this case, is that that conversation took place between the attorneys. But unfortunately, before the family could decide if they were okay with that, it got taken off the table. Now jumping forward to 2016, a new sheriff is in town, literally, and his name is Ian Parkinson. And as a result, there was a renewed interest in the case. Now this time, police, they come out and they're like, we're going to solve this. We're going to make this happen. We promise the family. And the family seems really happy with this guy and his administration, which they were not happy with anybody else prior to this, which is totally fair. Now, for whatever reason, the sheriff's office, they dig up an area on campus and they are looking for Kristin's body there. And I remember listening to Your Own Backyard and being like, why would they do that? And he kind of wondered the same thing. And all they could think of was like, they must have had good information to do this because that's really random. So maybe they thought that her body never actually left campus, which is a little strange to me because no cadaver dogs ever alerted anywhere but Paul's room. So I don't know. But in any case, that was kind of their first big thing that they did. They still did not dig up Paul's yard, and they still had not dug up Susan's yard. But here we are digging up the campus. After this, maybe they're working it, but there's nothing really coming out publicly. So we're going to fast forward again to 2019 when things really start to get serious again regarding this case. And this is because finally, someone who gives a shit, podcaster and journalist Chris Lambert, releases an extremely well-researched podcast about the case, which uncovers new evidence and shines a light on the absolutely dismal job all police departments did on this case. At the time this comes out, Paul Flores is living in the South Bay, but his parents are both still in their Arroyo Grande homes. It's later found out that Paul's parents are paying his bills and likely paid for his house because this guy is, above all else, a complete fuck up. Anyway, after immense public pressure to finally do their fucking goddamn jobs, the police recover Paul Flores' truck and his father's old truck as well. And I didn't really get into all of that about the trucks, but basically they were likely used to transport Kristin's body, and Ruben told a bunch of lies about the trucks. And then the family, quote unquote, they either sold or were quote unquote stolen before police could search them, which, to be clear, police had ample time to do so before the family disappeared them in these various ways. But nearly 25 years later, it comes out that they've found the vehicles and they are searching them. Now, I don't know if anything came of this, but I do know that on top of searching the cars, police also get search warrants for all 3 of the Flores homes, including Paul's down in the South Bay. And in his home, they find some very serious shit. And this part is what makes me so extra angry, because if the police had done their jobs in the first place, Paul would not have had 25 plus years to do all of these horrible things, what he liked to do in his spare time. And what that was to drug and rape women that he met at various bars. And we know he did this for a fact not only because several came forward with stories about his doing this to them, but because he had multiple video recordings of himself raping these women in his home while they were either completely passed out or clearly so out of it they couldn't advocate for themselves or fight him off. These rapes often included a ball gag, which multiple women reported experiencing because many of them that came forward were awake enough to sort of remember pieces. These rapes also included sodomy. And one woman said that even though she agreed to come home with him and spend the night with him willingly, he still drugged her by giving her a glass of water once they got to his house. So this was something that he wanted to do. He wanted to have these women incapacitated. He wanted to have this control over them. He did not want consensual sex. He wanted to hurt women. And this is what he did for 25 years. And I also want to note, this is really important to the narrative of what likely went down the night that Kristin died. Because after this all came out, women from before Kristin's disappearance came forward with similar stories of either being drugged by him or seeing other women being drugged by him at parties. So this was a pattern that likely started before Kristin and continued even after she was murdered, because he doesn't fucking care. He didn't get caught for her murder, so he's going to keep risking women's lives to do these horrible things to him because there's something deeply fucking wrong with him. And remember in part 1 when I said she was presumably drunk at the party and that's why she was passed out? Things change a bit when you realize that Paul was essentially stalking her the entire night and that she was so out of it she could barely walk. And as a reminder, her friend said that she had had one drink prior to attending the party, and she'd only been at the party for about 2 hours. Unless she had been doing back shots, which nobody reported seeing her do, it's very likely that Paul drugged her so that he could rape her. It's also very likely that something happened during the rape that led to him killing her. My thought is that she was able to fight back, unlike the other women, because she's larger than a lot of the other women. She's over 6 feet tall. So he probably didn't give her enough drugs to fully put her out. And so she was able to fight him back, hence the scratches, hence the black eye. I mean, that's just my thought. And clearly, Paul is a very violent person with no qualms about hurting women in any way. So if I had to guess, I would say he probably strangled her to death in a fit of rage, then called his father to help him dispose of her body. And on the topic of burying Kristin's body with Ruben's help, one other very important thing to note is that in February of 2020, after Your Own Backyard came out, and when the heat really turns up on the Flores family, neighbors reported hearing 3 people in Ruben's yard arguing and digging in the middle of the night underneath his deck. Chris Lambert reported this and got everyone's attention. And this is extremely frustrating because really the focus was always on Susan's yard because of the earring and the watch. But like I said earlier, maybe they buried Kristin's clothing and maybe Paul's too at Susan's house and put Kristin's body in Ruben's house, in his yard. We'll never know for sure because the police are trash. But in 2021, about a year after this incident, police got another warrant to search Ruben's yard and found a large disturbance, more than 6 feet long and 4 feet wide and 4 feet deep, in the far corner under his deck. They tested the soil there and found evidence of human remains through staining on the dirt. Kristin had been there the entire time, and police gave the family every chance to move her before they were found out, and the family took that opportunity. Her body has still never been found. Finally, in April 2021, after this digging, after they go to Ruben's yard, Paul Flores was finally arrested for the murder of Kristin Smart, with Ruben Flores arrested as an accessory after the fact. The trial took place in the summer and fall of 2022, spanning multiple weeks. And luckily, Chris Lambert was able to report on the trial despite the defense attorney attempting to make him a witness, which would have made him unable to be present for the trial, because if you're a witness, you can't watch the trial because it can affect your testimony. Anyway, the trial is crazy, and I'll just say the defense attorney has no soul and no morals or shame, in my opinion. But luckily, after I believe 11 weeks or so, Paul Flores was in fact found guilty of Kristin's murder and subsequently sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. If you want trial coverage, again, Your Own Backyard Podcast is a fantastic resource for this. Now, these trials were held concurrently, but with two different juries. And while Paul Flores' jury found him guilty, Ruben somehow was found not guilty, which haunts me, but I take solace in knowing that he and Susan's lives have been straight up ruined by this case, and they deserve it. Now, unfortunately, I don't believe that Kristin Smart's body will ever be found. The police gave Ruben 20 plus years to research the best way to dispose of her body should he ever need to move her, and I'm sure that he took plenty of notes and did it in a way that is permanent, and that's really, really upsetting. I will also note that Paul is appealing his case and has a host of silly reasons, but it is going to court next month, October 2025, so we'll see how that goes. For now, he has not been charged with the rape of any of his victims from the videos, but I have a strong feeling that if the state believed he would be released, they would go after him there. I find it interesting that LA County never did to begin with, but they do have that back pocket, so I feel good that he will remain behind bars, hopefully forever. I did also want to note that he's been stabbed in prison, we'll say shanked, a couple of times. And if you guys remember when I did Roger Kibbe, his death was actually at the hands of another inmate. That same inmate stabbed Paul Flores in prison. I don't really feel bad about that. You know, I can't say that I care. But I did want to note that because, again, it's another way that the cases kind of tie together. I guess the prison community is smaller than we think. Paul's sister, by the way, I know I mentioned her a couple of times. She bailed out. She went to Washington to get away from all of this, and I don't blame her. That being said, she is a cagey jerk about the whole thing. I have a feeling she knows more than she's letting on. She refuses to talk to anybody about it. And, you know, being born into that family, raised by that family, I can't expect she's a very happy person. But anyway, as for Kristin's legacy, it continues on through her amazing family and friends who have helped pass legislation to protect students on campuses nationwide, have set up scholarships in her name, and have celebrations of life for her yearly. I would like to think that her memory inspires people to travel, to learn, to be kind to others, and also on a more practical level, don't leave your friends at parties. I know I've done it. I've done it more than once. It's so easy. It's so innocent. Nothing's going to happen, right? And if it does, I want to reiterate, it's not your fault. But the best way to keep it from happening is to stick together, even if it seems like everything's going to be okay. So anyway, that's the case of the murder of Kristin Smart. If there are any big case updates, I will definitely let you guys know. My hope is that this appeal is going to get thrown in the trash, and that'll kind of be the end of that. Ruben is, I think, 82 years old at this point, so hopefully he dies soon. And I really hope that they do eventually dig up Susan's yard underneath those fucking planter boxes, because I think they would find some stuff down there that they could use as leverage to find out what happened to Kristin's body. So anyway, that's all for this week. Thanks everybody for tuning in, liking, rating, reviewing, sharing with your friends and family. I'd really love to see this little podcast grow. Shout out to Darkcast Network for being the best little network in the world. When I was out for a few months, they were more understanding than I could have ever imagined and welcomed me back with open arms. If you are a podcaster and you need to join a network, get you one like that, because they're the best. So that's all. Thanks again, everybody. And until next week, stay safe.